go back and watch them. They've all been great. We've been getting a lot of feedback that's been great from them. But today we're going to talk about the last thing is the protection of the legacy that you've built. Now, when I started Fed Legacy, it was all about wealth accumulation. You know, you've all heard me talk about closing the racial wealth gap, what I saw at the University of Maryland, which I wasn't seeing in my community. And those things have been consistent. You know, we're starting to see a change. I know the work we're doing here at Fed Legacy, we're making significant strides with that. But at the end of the day, what we're going to talk about today is after you accumulate everything, what happens when it goes to that next generation and what's some of the threats that exist if you don't make the right moves when it comes to protecting your legacy. Because here's the thing: the IRS writes rules, you know, Congress writes rules, banks write rules in ways in which to cipher off that money that you work so hard to protect. Because a lot of times, if your next generation don't know what to do, then that money has to go somewhere. And where that money goes to is the smart individuals that, well, not, I wouldn't even say smart, but just the individuals that understand how laws work, tax law, court, things like that. And so, what you want to make, what we're going to talk about today is some of those things you can do to make sure you seal that jar, so that you're when you pass on, only people that can open that jar, that safe, is your family, right? And so, I'm sharing my screen today. And so here's we like to call it the protection stack. You know, if you know anything about what you've been reading our emails lately, we just started Fed Trust and Wills. We're just launching that. We just launched that a month or so ago. We've been taking on clients. We just started taking on clients. So if you want to talk about your trust and will, we call it again Fed Trust and Wills. Just just drop something in the chat. Drop estate in the chat, and we'll make sure we get you a call schedule with our estate team. We're pretty backed up right now, but give us some time. We'll make sure we get you on the calendar. But just put estate in the chat if you want to talk to our Fed Trust and Wills company. And you know, we work with licensed attorneys, the whole nine. You know, it took us a while to roll it out, but we finally have it rolled out. So if you want to meet with our estate planning service, just put estate put estate in the chat, and we'll make sure we get to you. So now, it's not, this is not here to scare you, right? Because a lot of this stuff, a lot of folks, when they come to us, they're not afraid. They're afraid of what could go wrong, right? We're not here to scare you. We're here to give you a flashlight, and so that you can find those different holes that exist within your financial house. So one of the blind spots, one of the blind spots a lot of folks have is what happens to their pension when they retire. I mean, when they pass on. What happens to your TSP? What are the impacts of a non-structured tax strategy? What happens with long-term care, right? And so we want to make sure that you understand those things. So the system that never stress tests, most people never stress test, is what happens when you pass and your money gets left to a spouse. I was telling a story the other day about a couple who, the husband made a lot of money in the government, worked for GAO for a lot of years, and he retired. And he's just like, man, I'm not doing survivor benefit, And it wasn't. He just was like, man, it costs too much. It was like his survivor benefit was like $600 or something like that. And he was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that because I already got. He's like, I already have life insurance. He had like $150,000 policy, but he was like, look, he's like, I'm not doing that one. And so when I ran the numbers, the thing he was shocked by, he didn't know that if he would have passed, his wife wouldn't get the health insurance. And when I the FEHB, and when I explained it to him, and I showed him what the cost is of his health insurance now versus the scenario that we ran, whether that if she was 70 years old and had to go out and get her own health insurance, he signed up really quickly. But he signed up for the survivor benefit really quickly. But had he not had that conversation with me, he would have never done that, along with and she would have never really enforced it because she thought the life insurance was enough and what they had, their TSP, was enough. Once you ran that scenario, it just wasn't nowhere close, right? So if you're a person who you're on the fence about survivor benefit, obviously, life insurance can make a huge deal, and it also depends on what you have in your TSP. But you really have to run proper tax strategies and things like that, because when you pass, and we've talked about this many times, your spouse now goes from a married filing jointly to a single filer, and those tax brackets at the bottom are very slim, and so you can get into those higher tax brackets pretty quickly, which ultimately affects your Medicare and a whole host of other things, taxes, whole host of other things. So you want to make sure you understand that stuff, right? And so the second thing again, healthcare, making sure you understand, what that cost difference will be if your spouse doesn't have that FEHB. But also things like long-term care, because when you're married couples living together, you all can support each other in a way. But when one's gone, now you have to rely on the kids. You have to rely on expensive nurses or home health care situations. The cost of things go way up when you're not married and you're filing single and you're single now, right? So you want to make sure that your spouse is covered. And the reason why you want to is because what ends up happening is you end up spending a whole lot more money, and that money gets siphoned out of the family. Another thing, you want to make sure you have your documents. And so one of the things we always talk about is making sure you have your healthcare directives. Make sure you have your power of attorneys, because something happens, there's no power of attorney on file, and maybe it goes down to your kids and you got 3 kids. Now nobody can really make decisions. Then you got to pay lawyers, you got to go to court, you got to have this wait time. And in that wait time, now your kids are using their own money, and it just becomes a mess, all because you just didn't have your documents together, right? And so, and again, uh, courts, companies, they prey on stuff like this because that's where they make their money from people being unprepared, right? And so, for protection plans, you want to make sure you have your state basics. You want to make sure you have your will, power of attorney, directives, and your beneficiary set up. So many times I've talked to people, and they might be in their second marriage, and they just forgot one document that might have their ex spouse on there, or they're divorced, and now they have their ex-spouse on there, but they want the money to go to their kids. I mean, I've seen it all, right? I've seen people go through really messy divorces. They pass, and then they have a fiance or something like that, and all of a sudden, who hates them altogether, and they need the money. And all of a sudden, the ex-spouse gets. I've seen all type of stuff, all because of simple mistakes that could be avoided. And again, this right here is about protecting what you have and making sure you cross all your T's and dot all your I's, right? And then again, survivor income. I just finished talking about that. Making sure you understand what the survivor income is, the threats to that, how you replace it. And the thing about all of this is you just need to run different scenarios. And that's something that me and my team were really good at, because we see it all the time. And so if you want to sit down and want to go through these scenarios with us, we'll put the link to book a call, Fed Legacy. I can't even think of the link. I think it's fedlegacycall.com. We'll put the link in there. We'll put the link in the chat, and make sure that we schedule a call with you, right? And we'll go through all these things with you. The next thing is the healthcare, like I mentioned, the health insurance, super important. Long-term care, even more important, because that stuff gets expensive when it's just you. And one thing that we don't talk enough about, is living benefits. So a lot of folks, they take FEGLI into retirement. FEGLI obviously is federal employee group life insurance. It starts off very cheap when you're young. As you age, it gets more expensive. But the thing that FEGLI does not have, that outside policies do have, especially the ones we offer, is living benefits. Living benefits is a game changer, especially because it's like that first layer of defense if you have a major health issue. So, case in point, we had a lady, um, she had cervical cancer out of nowhere, and she was close to retirement, but she wasn't quite at that age. And she had a $350,000 policy with us. And so she came to me, she's like, "But Smith, I know I got that policy with the living benefit. I don't want to retire. I don't have a lot of leave, and I don't want to go into my TSP because I might have to pay that 10% penalty." And she's like, "But I need to take a lot of time off, and my kids, I need them to help take care of me," and things like whole thing, a lot of stuff that was just going to cost her a lot of money. So she was able to get 125, I believe, out of her living benefit off her life insurance. Now it reduced the life insurance amount, but that 125,000 gave her tons of peace of mind. And so you want to make sure that when it comes to protecting your legacy, again, protect it. Now, she was able to beat it. She was able to still continue to work after the treatments and everything. But the most important thing was she was able to continue to keep her TSP growing, because her TSP compounded over time is what's going to take care of her in the long run. Right. And so you want to make sure you have those living benefits. Right. And so, and just being aware of option B, we talk about option B a lot, in the government. And so option B is one of those things, as it increases in cost every 5 years, that's something that takes away from your TSP. So what you want to do is you want to make sure you fix that option B cost so that you can put that difference back in your TSP and let that compound. I can't tell you how many times we talk to folks and they just, they fix their life insurance costs. And then we won't talk to them, maybe sometimes for 2, 3 years. And then when we talk to them, they're like, Mrs. Smith, oh, that little change I did, now I'm excited. My TSP has grown so much. Like, and that's a big deal, right? Because your TSP is going to be what takes care of you in life. So a lot of times you'll hear people that sell life insurance and do life insurance only. What they try to push is they try to scare you and say, well, you want to get this IUL or you want to get this whole life policy because you want it to last your whole life. We first started Fed Legacy, we believed in that. I'm not even gonna lie. But then after I started doing more math, doing more studying, it doesn't make sense. The amount of money you put into to a whole life policy, you should be putting that money into your TSP, specifically the Roth TSP, if you want those same tax deferred benefits that you get out of a life insurance policy. And here's the reason why. Because when you retire, you're still going to be paying for the life insurance. But if you didn't put enough in your TSP, you know what's going to happen? The first time you have a financial emergency in retirement, the thing you're going to do is you're going to cancel the life insurance. And we've seen that over and over and over again with people who come to us that these big whole life insurance policies sounds good. We're going over their retirement numbers. They're like, this $400 life insurance policy, I think I'm okay with this. I'm gonna cancel that. And so you don't get the benefit anyway. What you should do is buy a term policy, fix the cost of the term policy at a low premium, and then load your TSP up. Now, if you're maxing out your TSP already, then we could talk about a whole life policy. And there's people that do that. But if you're not there yet, the best bet is to load up your TSP because when you do, you'll have so much money in your TSP, the life insurance doesn't matter. And here's the thing. The reason why we think this way at times is because we're so used to our grandparents who didn't have real strong pensions, didn't have real strong salaries. But as a federal employee, you're going to have your pension, you're going to have your social security. So your TSP, you're not really going to use much of that anyway. And I know I talk about that a lot. And so you're going to see that just continue to grow. I talk to people all the time who now they're 2 years into retirement, 3 years into retirement, and their CSP is still growing. And they're like, well, what do I do with all this money? I'm like, well, what's your dream car? I was talking to a lady yesterday. I was like, what's your dream car? And she was telling, I was like, well, you can do it. Like, just like spend the money because it's going to grow anyway. And so for you, it's the same thing. It's just like making sure you put enough in your TSP so that that is the thing that's growing when you retire because you don't have to pay into that every month. With the whole life policy, you're committed to a large premium every month, even in retirement, and that can be problemsome sometimes. Um, yeah, so that's the life insurance piece. And so then we got the healthcare part. We'll talk about Medicare Part B in a minute. Again, the survivor benefit is only 10% of your pension, and your spouse gets 50% of what your pension is. So for example, if your pension is 6,000, your spouse will get 3,500 for the rest of their life. And on top of that, that goes up as your cost of living goes up. So if your pension starts off at 6,000 and it keeps rising, 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 they get half of that. So it offsets inflation to help them out there. Because if you don't give up that 10%, then they don't get anything. And so you got to be aware of that. And then just making sure healthcare directives, power of attorney, beneficiary forms. And we now do that for folks with our Fed Trust and Wills company. And so if you want to session with us, just put a state in the chat, and I'll make sure the team reaches out to you in the next couple of weeks. Oh, my slides are a little messed up here. Here's one thing that I want to illustrate. So one of the things that we have to be aware of, especially when it comes to tax strategy, is let's say you pass and your spouse inherits. Your spouse is a non-federal employee, by the way. They inherit your TSP. They can keep the money in TSP, but it becomes a beneficiary account. If they pass and that money's in the beneficiary account, your children then they don't have 10 years to take that money out. They have 1 year. So let's say it's 400,000, like in this example. And your spouse, they leave the TSP money in the TSP, they pass. Now your kids are gonna get a check for 400,000, which is gonna get taxed almost up to 40% of that easily or above. So now a big portion of your money that you left them now is going to the IRS because your spouse left the money in the TSP. So, because they call it the second death. So the first death, you're allowed to do, you can roll it anywhere. You can do an inherited IRA. You have way more options. Well, in that second death of the same account, the IRS wants all their money. So again, these are some of these small mistakes that people make that make a big difference. This is why when people turn 59 and a half, they move some money into separate IRAs because it protects them. Like if they pass, they have money somewhere else, right? And so you want to make sure you have a strategy when it comes to tax planning in retirement. Well, not just retirement, but when it's time for you, when you pass, you want to make sure your money is allocated in the proper ways so the IRS doesn't come and get that money. Um, Here's another thing, IRMA. And so when you're married, the first IRMA cliff, and IRMA is for Medicare premiums, right? Okay. And so the first cliff when you're married is 218,000, right? You pay 202 up to 218,000. When you pass, I mean, if you pass, and now your wife has this, or your husband has, still has, they have lesser income, but they're in a smaller tax bracket. The IRMA premium, I mean, cliff drops, and so now it starts at 109. So if they're making 120 between Social Security, the survivor benefit, what they're taking out of TSP, now they're paying 284 a month, right? And so along with the more taxes that they're paying. And so they getting hit on the IRMA more, they getting hit on taxes more. This is why you have to strategize. And the way to avoid this type of stuff is making sure you have as much non-taxable money coming in every month. Like money from a Roth IRA is significant. Money that you already pay taxes on, that type of stuff. That matters because that income doesn't count against these thresholds, right? So you want to make sure again you have a tax strategy that allows your spouse to be able to breathe easy when you pass on, right? And so again, estate plan, survivor income, healthcare, life and living benefits, super super important. And again, some of the stuff not that expensive. Just want to make sure you get it done, right? So what I want y'all to do is just look at this, right? Just measure before I get to the Q&A. I just want you to measure your stack. Does your life insurance have living benefits? Do you have FEGLI option B and you aware of the cost at age 65? Have you even compared private coverage? So like look at this. If you haven't done those things, or there's a gap that you see, reach out to us. We can support you with that, or just take care of it on your own. But we would love to support you on this stuff. Um, are you thinking about Survivor election? Have you made it? I know especially if you're retiring soon. If you haven't run those numbers, let us know. We'll help you run those numbers for you so you can see. Um, is your spouse prepared? Right. So, like the story I told earlier, this spouse was like, yeah, we don't need survivor benefit, but she didn't know the numbers though. And so you want to make sure your spouse understands the numbers and what's at risk. And then if will the FEHB continue? And if it doesn't, what's the cost? Now you can't really predict that cost because what ends up happening is if your spouse passes, I mean, if you pass, you don't have a survivor benefit. They have to go out and get a private policy, private coverage, and they're going to look at their health elements, right? A 75-year-old with health elements, unfortunately, is going to have a higher premium, and so you just have to know those things. Do you have a long-term care plan? All that type. Do you have a current will, power of attorney, directive, TSP beneficiaries? Have you checked that in a while? You want to make sure you understand those things. And so, if you want to book a call with us, we do our retirement readiness review. We cover all that plus a whole lot more. We'll take our first call is our readiness call. We review our readiness assessment where we grade you on these different well, you grade yourself first at the beginning, like almost like a pretest. Then what we do is we see where you are, see the concerns you have. Then we help you build out our retirement analyzer. We'll do it for you. We'll just get information. And that's a second call. We do our strategy session where we'll get on the Zoom, we'll share screens, we'll look at all this stuff, and our system will give you the red flags where they're necessary and say, okay, here are areas we need to fix. And then our third call is what we call our closing the gap. But we'll bring back solutions to it. The first call, we don't really make solutions, we just identify it, talk through it, make sure it's correct. Then we go through our closing the gap. And then we do our fourth call, which is our setup call, which is where we help you actually implement this stuff. And so if you want to book a call, definitely book the call and the link or let us know in the link. You can put plan in the chat and we'll make sure we reach out to you to make sure we get you on the book to do one of these retirement readiness reviews. So at this point, we got about 10 minutes left. I want to know if anybody has questions. Is there any questions? Let me see. Any questions? So one of the things that we hear about all the time is, what happens with money that's in the Roth IRA when you pass on. So money in a Roth IRA, you don't have to pay taxes on when you retire. When you pass on, your kids can inherit that money. There's no taxes due on it, which is great. This is why you're hearing a lot of folks talk about doing Roth conversions and things like that right now because they want to make sure that their kids aren't inheriting a tax mess, right? And so that's one of the questions that we get a lot of, and so that's one of the things that you just definitely want to do because what we're seeing now is, especially is if your TSP balance is high, you're going to see between federal and state, your kids are going to be in the 37, 40% tax bracket in some cases for 10 years straight because they have to withdraw the money in 10%, or they can withdraw the money in 10% increments. That's the lowest way for them to pay the lowest amount of taxes. But even still, now that they're when they take in their personal income that they get from their job, plus what they're inheriting from you, it puts them in a very high tax bracket. And so you want to make sure that you understand that and get ahead of that because you can pay the IRS at a much lower tax bracket and leave the majority of that money to your kids for them to enjoy, right? And then there's even things with that, right? You want to make sure that they understand how it works, and that's why we started Fed Trust and Wills because we wanted to make sure that family. A lot of folks come to us and they're like, "Well, I don't want my kids to get everything at one time. I want it to be this way and that way." And so we did Fed Trust and Wills. We started Fed Trust and Wills because we wanted to help you in that customization and making sure that you're able to do that. And so if you book a retirement readiness call, we will absolutely get you straight. So Sanja, if you have a trust, is it necessary to have a will? No. If you have a trust, you don't need a will. But if you have a will and not a trust, you absolutely need a trust because a will doesn't a will can still go to probate. A trust, you'll be protected. So nah, it's smart that you have a trust, but no. And you do have a trust, right, Sanja? I think you do. I'm not sure. Um, any more questions? All right. Yeah, if you don't have if no more questions, I'm a log off tonight, but just make sure you book a call with us. We will take you through this entire process and make sure you're good. Again, it's a full call process. The first call, we do a discovery. We're readiness call. We take you through our assessment, see where you are on these 5 categories. Then the next call, we take you through our strategy session where we go through retirement analyzer, make sure you're good there, make sure you understand where your numbers are. The third call, we do our closing the gap. We make sure we take you, we take what we identified, we create solutions for you. Then the fourth call, we set that up for you. And the call is free too, by the way. So just book that call with us. We'll make sure we get you straight so that when you retire, you can retire with confidence, peace of mind, and not have to look back and go back to work or anything like that. All right. All right. All right, everybody. Have a good one.